With your indulgence, we have economists in our studio, and they have a few questions for you. With your permission, if I can open this up for them to ask you questions. And in those visuals, we saw Rahul Gandhi coming out of Parliament, not saying much. Maybe he's waiting to take a closer look at the budget. But go ahead, Rohit Azad.
So two questions on... One? Just one. Okay, so
one question.
One question. If there is indeed a long-term growth path that you're talking about, then how come consumption has actually grown at less than? It's almost half of the growth of the GDP. So where do you see this growth actually happening in the long term when consumption itself is not growing? If we just take 1 point on that.
But consumption is not an end by itself. Consumption comes from creating jobs. How do you create consumption? Consumption comes from driving productivity. Consumption comes from driving the growth in Indian economy. If you don't create jobs, how will consumption grow? If you don't look at the employment aspect of this budget, you are making a huge mistake. The budget is all consumption based because it is driving employment, and from employment will come consumption. If you don't drive manufacturing, how will consumption happen?
No,
consumption is an outcome of manufacturing.
So you are assuming that any credit-based scheme is going to generate jobs. But jobs are not created only by providing credit. You need demand for jobs to be created. There is no provision for that, at least in this budget, from the budget speech.
What happens when you do...
Okay.
No.
Yes.
No, you're totally mistaken as an economist. What happens when you put money into infrastructure? What happens when you do urbanization? Don't you create good quality jobs? Won't that lead to consumption?
It hasn't so far.
Do you believe in a theory of just giving doles? Which will...
No, I don't. In fact, sir, since you have raised this question, the Capex expenditure that was promised in the budget estimate was 1 lakh crore. The actual one, which has come out now in the economic survey and in the budget, is 48,000 crores. So the estimate that you provided is not what you're spending. So how do you expect the promises that you're making in this budget to actually happen? Sir, you yourself are saying that Capex is driving the economy, but it has...
He's responding.
No. So don't look at the interim budget, because it's important to look at the allocations being made now, and you will see in the next 6 months, a lot of infrastructure will get driven. But I also envisage that an economy like India is to grow on the back of private sector. The government has been driving the Capex spend for the last 3 to 4 years. And actually that has acted as a catalyst now for private sector to take over in due course. And to my mind, the private sector seeds of investment have started flowing in, and in the next 2 to 3 years, you'll see a lot of private sector investment kicking in. That was delayed because of the COVID, but eventually in the long run, the Indian economy, all of us must envisage that the private sector will drive India's economy, and the government will just be a good facilitator. But the government has done all the heavy lifting already.
Well, so let's take that question to the private sector. Thank you very much, Amitabh Kant, for joining me. And also joining me on this broadcast is Sunil Kant Munjal, chairman of the Hero Group. And Mr. Munjal, there Amitabh Kant telling us that it is clearly a lookout, a vision for the private sector coming in and helping the Indian economy grow. Something that hasn't really happened so far over the last 3 or 4 years. In the post-COVID era, at least. Do you see that changing, given the fact that Prime Minister Modi and Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman have given a direction in this budget which is of continuity as well as facilitating a lot of investment along with the hope that employment will be generated?
Yes, Navika. So first, let me say this budget is more than just an annual budget. It really looks like a statement of intent of how the government wants to operate in the next 5 years as well. So I like that they've shown responsibility by maintaining fiscal discipline, by the fiscal deficit being contained at 4.9% despite all the internal and external pressures. I also like that she said next year it will be 0.5% lower. Now, that demonstrates to me that the government is willing to put take responsibility for what it's doing. There was fear in this general system that because this is a new age of coalition politics, we will see money being literally thrown around all over the place. There has been allocation to the eastern areas, to the states of governments which are from partners in the government. But those are states which probably will benefit more than other areas by supporting infrastructure, agriculture, tourism, etc. So to your point, will the private sector come in? See, the private sector has a very natural growth orientation, but that needs an environment where everything else falls into place. For the last few years, and you're right, that the private sector has not played the key role. The government has. The government has played a wonderful role in continuing to invest in infrastructure especially, and that now has benefited us significantly by both creating jobs and creating facilitation for growth in the future. We are like an island today in the entire global economy. A country which continues to grow at above 6% is a rare sight anywhere in the world. And what has been done by saying that we will provide incentive to individuals to take on jobs and to companies to provide jobs, I think is a good signal. The rest of it will come, as I heard you speak a little bit earlier, somebody was, I think Amitabh, was talking about this, that as industry grows, as the incomes grow, consumption is a natural fallout. And that's the virtuous cycle we need to get into. We are seeing early signs of this turnaround, and I hope that this is a turnaround for a longer period of time, because in this budget there are multiple indications: allocation for research, focusing on basic research, allocation for digitalization, encouraging, looking at urban infrastructure, cities as economic engines in themselves, which is the way, by the way, many countries have developed their economies. Looking at the rural areas as a development engine independent of the general economy. So overall, I think it's a reasonably well-balanced budget. There have been things like the irritants which existed in the world of startups which have been removed.
The angel
for a while
tax
now,
going away.
The startup world, which is a necessary growth engine for India, was asking for angel tax to be removed and other irritants which have been addressed. So overall, I think this is a pretty good budget, all considered, and it shows the direction of growth can continue. And I do think the industry feels comfort and confidence in what the government has put out, because a lot of these recommendations actually had come from industry itself. We had put out many of these recommendations which have been taken up in the budget.
So let me ask you, point blank, are they listening to you more at 240 than they were listening to you at 303 in Lok Sabha?
So that's what I said, that this budget has a lot of stuff that industry had recommended in it. And I think it also demonstrates the government's acceptance and recognition of where the challenges lie. Simplifying tax, because tax has been an area which creates a lot of friction and disputes. Ease of business, continuing focus on that. Decriminalizing some of the activities and allowing compounding. So these are the kind of things that we have been saying are completely unnecessary in an open market and economy like India. Please do take our word for what industry needs and allow industry to function freely, independently, and in a fair manner.
Well, so 6 on 10, 7 on 10, 8 on 10, or 10 on 10, what kind of a budget do you rate this to be?
I don't like Navika to give any marks or numbers, but as I said, overall, I think it's a very good budget.
This is not a leaked paper. All report cards will be considered genuine and will not be challenged in the Supreme Court.
That is fine. But I do think, all considered, it is a very good budget, especially considering the constraint that we are working under currently, both the fiscal and the revenue constraint. There is a recognition, however, if you see the GST numbers that are put out, there is fear that some of the collections may go down or may taper off, at least not go down. It may taper off from the continuous growth we have seen. We do hope that does not happen, though, because you do need those resources. Because what the government has said in many cases, we will provide the backup guarantee for other agencies, multilateral agencies to come in. Some places they've said the state government should pitch in along with the center, and some they said the multilateral agencies to come in to support this big growth program that is getting announced.
Well, we do hope and keep our fingers crossed that these things happen, not just on paper, but in reality. Thank you very much, Sunil Kant Munjal, for